Hello again, YouTube, and welcome back to Just Get a Tesla. This is a slightly different one because I thought you might be interested in my EV journey. So this is not our first EV. As you've seen on some of the other videos, we've also got a Hyundai Ioniq in the fleet as well. But that's not where the story starts. Back in 2014, we were really early adopters in that we got a Nissan Leaf, a centre trim with a 24 kilowatt hour battery pack, which meant it had a few toys and a tiny battery. The exciting thing was that we were joining the future and, electric was going to be the way forward. We lived in Teesside and they were being built in Sunderland just up the road. So we felt like, we're part of something here. And the council and a few other places are starting putting up charging points. And it's like, wow, we can plug the car in and charge for free and drive around places. And honestly, it was really exciting to have it. You get people in the car for the first time and you drive off silently because it's an EV and they go, oh wow, this is amazing, this is unreal, and all of that kind of stuff. And that's all true. But there were a few issues with it. And let's just quickly touch on some of those. One, the range was supposed to be 100 miles. But in practice, when I tried to drive down the motorway, fairly gently, 65 miles an hour cruise speed, which is kind of what I usually do these days, I ran out of juice on 75 miles. Now, there was an ecotricity charge point at Woolly Edge on the M1 at 72 miles. So I literally rolled in on electrons, not fumes, on my first ever long trip in the car, basically with poo coming out the back. So that wasn't a great start. And to be fair, we did get used to taking it on slightly longer trips. But honestly, 100 miles was a fantasy. An absolute fantasy. If you trundle the thing around town, maybe. But for any other kind of use that you might have, absolutely not. I did take the Leaf on a few adventures. So we did drive it slightly longer distances over the Pennines to my parents, which needed a charge on the way there and a charge on the way back. And I would plug it in their garage on a slightly dodgy socket, which would get really, really, really warm. We did use some public chargers, but we realised fairly early on that the public charging network was rubbish. So there were these slow type 2 public chargers here and there, which were all free. And if you could get on one and it was working, great. But a lot of the time, they get vandalized really quickly and nobody seems to own them. Or you'd have Ecotricity, who would install one rapid charger on certain motorway services. And when I say rapid, I mean a maximum speed of 50 kilowatts. And you really wouldn't get that unless your car was on absolute vapors when you pulled in. And I did have one night where I got to Weatherby services, which was one charger for traffic going north and south on the A1, and there was somebody plugged in and there was somebody waiting, and that one was quite a wait to be able to get in. But I had to plug in to be able to get back to Teesside, about another 40 miles, because there was literally nothing between Weatherby and home. And I think on that one I ended up getting slightly less than I wanted, and was doing 40 miles an hour on the last bit on the normal roads because I literally thought I was going to run out. I only ever saw turtle mode once on the Leaf, and it was then, and that is the point where you start thinking, is this thing going to end up being towed? Let's talk about the other issue. This was a Nissan, and we bought it from Evans Halshaw, which was the local Nissan dealers. And if we didn't like Evans Halshaw, we could go to one of the neighbouring towns where the Nissan dealers were Evans Halshaw. And those guys did not give a rat's about electric cars. What they wanted to do was to sell you a Nissan Qashqai. And if you didn't want to buy a Qashqai, would you like to buy a Qashqai? A dealership who honestly didn't know what the car was, but you still had to pay a load of money to get the thing serviced, even though they didn't really do anything. I know there's another YouTuber who's now called EVM who had a car and he videoed his car having its windscreen washer bottle with wee added to it in the dealers. We've got the other issue, which was, the drivetrain was exciting at the time. Once you've driven a car with an electric motor, you never want to go back to a gearbox. So that was exciting. But other than that, it was a bizarrely designed car. The boot was an odd shape and had a huge loading lip and had bits of suspension protrusions into it. Like a lot of EVs, it's built on the same production line as petrol and diesel cars, which means that instead of having an engine stack under the bonnet, instead you've got an inverter and motor and all of the electrical gubbins. So terrible use of space. It had these weird quarter-light kind of crescent-shaped windows in the front that you had to stare through. Honestly, it wasn't a great car. Fantastic because it was an EV, but it wasn't great. And we were leasing the battery. So I had a PCP for the car and a separate one for the battery. It was cheap, but it was crazy. So when it got to the end of the PCP, because values had collapsed quite precipitously at the time, because people had realised that they're a bit pants, it was worth something like £5.50. So we handed it back because what they wanted for us to buy the car at the end of the deal was bonkers. So we handed the thing back in, actually with a smile, and we were very happy never to have to deal again with Nissan or Evans Hellshot. However, that wasn't the end of us and electric propulsion, because I then went onto a company car scheme and was able to pick up my first, as it turned out, Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid. Now, this was a 2015 car. It was the base trim level, so it actually had a few things missing on it. The Nissan, you could warm the thing up using an app. So, you're out, it's cold, press the button, and it warms the car before you get back to it. The Mitsubishi, that functionality was on the screen that wasn't on the base trim, so you didn't have any of that. And it smelt a bit agricultural because the previous owner, I think, had lived on a farm and it just stank of cow's arse. But there's something amazing about the drivetrain that they came up with. So basically, you've got in this case, a 2-litre petrol engine driving electric motors on the front and back. And again, you've got the smoothness and the quietness of electric propulsion. When the battery ran out, and it was a 12 kilowatt hour battery driving basically a big brick, so it could do 20 miles, basically-ish, 20 miles. So after that, the petrol engine kicked in. And what that would do is the petrol engine would drive into the battery to generate power, which would then turn the electric motors. Or, if you were on the motorway, the engine would engage a clutch and it would drive the front axle directly, which actually is really clever as a PHEV. It is clever. But that lasted for a year and a half before I changed jobs and the car got handed back along with the job. We had, though, at that point, really got into PHEVs. So we do like Hyundai. We've had several Hyundais previously, and we did a really good deal on a slightly used Ioniq HEV. So this is the standard hybrid car with the petrol engine and a 6-speed semi-automatic gearbox. I think it's dual clutch, actually. And then it's got an electric motor and a little tiny battery pack. And that could only do about 2 miles on full electric, but it was very clever the way it switched the thing in and out. Although, bizarrely, the electric motor drives through the gearbox. So you're driving along on EV mode and it's still going up and down through the gears, which I've never seen before. It's a bit odd. But really, really, really liked the car. It was fabulously efficient on the motorway, 65, 70 even miles per gallon, even with the family and luggage into it, because obviously the Ioniq is really slippery. Have a look at the video I've done about Ioniq EV and the design comparison of that with my Tesla, because although they're different cars, there's actually a lot of similarities. The point is that we really, really liked that car, but we were moving up to Scotland because COVID had changed the way that everything was being done. And frankly, we ended up with 2 cars that weren't really going anywhere. So we sold that car to give us some cash to be able to fund the move. So I then had, at that point, a Volvo S90 diesel. I'd gone back to diesel, and I'd said I was never going back to diesel, but the job I had at the time was going up and down the M1 all the time, so actually it made sense. I still love that car, right? Honestly, it's the most gorgeous car I've ever had. It was the most amazing interior that I've ever had, but it's not really suited for up here. So very quickly, we realised that we needed to trade that, and the best thing to trade it for was another Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid. This time it was a 2018 one. It had been facelifted. They had added loads of nice features like seats that weren't made out of what felt like vinyl, and a whole load of safety kits that wasn't on the original one. It had a newer engine, so a 2.4 litre rather than 2 litre, and a 13.8 kilowatt hour battery pack rather than 12. That meant it could do 25, maybe 30 at an absolute push miles on electric, and it was a lot more efficient on the motorway, so 40 miles per gallon instead of 32, which you'd get out of the other one. And I've used that car heavily when we got up here. I mean, when we bought the place that we're in now, we're actually sat inside a former bank, and next door that way, it used to be a bank, and when we bought it, you still had the counters and all of the security glass and all of that kind of stuff. So it got used heavily for the renovations of that office to completely clear it out. So I've loaded that car literally up to the roofline several times over, taking it to the tip. It was fabulous for that. It was really, really good. And the only reason it's gone is because there was the opportunity to get a Tesla. Now, I've always wanted a Tesla. Ever since we got the Leaf, and you start reading up on electric cars, the Model S had been out not long when we got the Leaf. So it was this aspirational brand, and it really was this, wouldn't it be great to have a Tesla? So they launched the Model 3. Actually, even before they launched the Model 3, I remember reading about it and thinking, wow, $35,000 EV. I mean, it won't be that here in the UK, but even if it's anywhere close to that. So obviously that came out, and I know a lot of people put their deposit down a long, long way in advance, but a small saloon car with a family isn't really big enough. We did test drive one and loved it, but we were waiting for the Model Y. So when that came along, we test drove that again, and we decided we were going to get one inside about 5 minutes. It was that quick. And then it was just basically waiting for one to be matched to my reservation to be able to get the thing here. So that's my EV story. I wanted a Tesla for best part of 10 years, 9 years, something like that. And I now have one. And the even better thing is that due to the joys of the internet, I now get to talk about my Tesla and to show it off and to go on adventures and stuff with all of you good people, which is kind of interesting. I had no idea that any of this was going to happen. And genuinely, I'm really excited that you guys are along for the ride. So in the comments, I would love to know what car you've got, if you've got an EV, or what car you were driving when you decided that you wanted an EV. Hopefully you've got a Tesla, or you're thinking at least about a Tesla, because yay Tesla. But look, tell me what your journey is. You just heard mine. What's your journey on an EV? Don't forget, like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, buy me a coffee if you want. That'd be fab, by the way. And I'll see you very soon on the next one here on Just Get a Tesla.